Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to another Word of Gord, Average Folks in the Afterlife, number 50. I think I got yesterday's number wrong, so just forget that 47 business. I think that was 49. Well, it have to be, because this is 50, so the last one has to be 49, right? Arithmetic? Yeah. Okay, continuing on with Kartika Go's Multidimensional Traveler. Interesting book of consciousness projections of all kinds. And interactions with her dying and deceased, quote unquote, grandfather. And before he passed, she had this experience. While we were in Fukuoka, I hope, my grandfather, who was alive and well at the time, visited me energetically for the first time. I found him sitting at the edge of my bed, calmly informing me that it was time for him to go, that death had finally come for him, and I ought to take good care of myself. His words brought me great alarm, and I selfishly begged him not to leave yet. I recall seeing his energy body dissipate slowly, and I immediately forced myself to wake up. As soon as I found myself back in my physical body, I worriedly reached for the phone next to my bed to call my father and ask him about grandfather's health and whereabouts. My father told me that he was doing all right and at home, but that he had experienced constricted breathing the day before and hence had to use an oxygen mask to assist him with his breathing. Despite his reassuring reply, I was overwhelmed with feelings of uneasiness for the rest of the day, and my intuition began nudging me to leave Japan as soon as possible to see my grandfather. And later, ups and downs of health. And let me see, where are we? When we arrived at the hospital, we found my grandfather unresponsive and in a coma. In an energetic sense, a coma is a state in which the consciousness has entirely or almost entirely departed from the physical body. With this in mind, and because I knew that the last bit of my grandfather's consciousness was being transferred out of his physical body, I knew I had no choice but to meditate in order to communicate with him. Even though I had previously been embarrassed about doing this in front of my close-minded family members, I dove into a meditative state and immediately sensed a presence in the room. Focusing it, I received a message. An individual's destiny to return to the spiritual realm should be celebrated. The voice resonated clearly through my mind, but not through my ears. It was telepathic. I soon recognized it was the same inner voice that had previously informed me of the timing of my grandfather's death. Maintaining this communication, I replied telepathically, "I know it is, but please give him more time. Just a little bit of time, I beg of you. I'm not ready to let him go." As my thoughts traversed the borders of my mind and into his, the hospital room was overcome with embraces and sighs of relief. To my bewilderment, it was as though my grandfather had been sent right back into his physical at that moment, for his eyes opened wide and he seemed to be fighting to breathe. I broke out of my meditative state as quickly as I could and embraced him tightly. Later that morning, we all returned home feeling relieved. I felt incredibly content and thankful for the higher beings, and I was too tired at that point to even care what my narrow-minded and conservative, yet loving family thought of me. I had not planned to travel consciously out of my body that night, so I was startled and overjoyed to find my grandfather standing next to my bed. Noticing my smile, he said calmly, "I have to go." His words deeply saddened me, and I cried out selfishly, "You can't go! What's going to happen to me if you go?" He looked at me, hesitating a bit, then repeated slowly in a serious tone, "I have to go. You have to let me go." I told him again that I couldn't, that he couldn't. There was a brief moment of silence between us before he said lovingly, "You have to let me go. What else am I supposed to do? I wouldn't be able to live normally. My legs are useless. Both of my arms are tied. And if I live, I wouldn't even be able to eat or speak. I'd be a vegetable. Imagine if you had to live your life in such a state. You have to let me go. And remember, I want you to take good care of yourself. I'm sorry that I won't be able to take care of you anymore. You have to be able to live your life independently. Remember to take good care of yourself always. Later, when he's back in a coma, the next day. That day, I arrived at the hospital earlier than usual in order to convey him the basic knowledge he needed to navigate successfully through the energetic dimensional realms. I stood by his bedside, holding his hand so that it would be easier for him to align myself to my frequency of thoughts, and began teaching him the basic concepts. Grandpa, I have 3 messages that you must remember. Firstly, in the world that you're going to, the mind is everything. Therefore, you need to control your mind. You can't think of anything or anyone negatively anymore. Let go of everything and envision the higher existences that people know as heaven. Think of that place, envision it within your mind. Secondly, you cannot feel any sadness or anger. Instead, you must only feel the love that you have for me and all of us. Only feel that. Trust me, Grandpa. Third of all, I know you dislike asking for help, but in the place that you're going to, nobody will guide you or help you unless you ask them to. So ask for assistance and go to a higher place, and they will come for you. You'll soon discover that there exist many dimensional existences apart from the one we live in, and I want you to go to a much higher one. You've graduated from your journey with flying colors. Other people having to go through what you did would have given up a long time ago, but you passed with flying colors. You have nothing to be afraid of. Let go of everything. I'm letting you go, okay, Grandpa? I love you, so I'm letting you go. You can go now. We will meet again, I know it. I'll be there in approximately 40 years, Earth time. Thank you for being my pillar of support, Grandpa. I'm very blessed to have met you in this life again. Thank you for the unconditional love that you have given me. Please go in peace. Then he passes, of course. Some hours later, the day after my grandfather's death, I arrived at my grandmother's house in a dilemma over whether or not I should tell her of my grandfather's passing. To my great astonishment, I found her sitting on the bed staring at a photograph of my grandfather that was hanging on the opposite wall. According to her nurse, she had been in this exact position all morning. My grandmother had unfortunately already entered the later stages of Alzheimer's disease. Most of the time she was unable to remember her own name, let alone the fact that my father even existed, grandfather. As she continued to longingly stare at the photograph, I approached her and slowly asked her how she was feeling. With her eyes still glued to the photograph, she replied sorrowfully, "My beloved came to me last night to say goodbye. He told me that he doesn't want anything anymore, that he was going to leave." Having expected her usual incomprehensible response, I looked at her in complete shock and grief before answering, "Well, you love him, don't you? It doesn't matter if he's gone. Love is everlasting." Upon hearing my words, she began to sob loudly and, grabbing my arms demandingly, asked in a distressed tone, "How can I love him if he's gone?" I sat down next to her and began to rub her back, attempting to comfort and calm her with my soothing words. Within minutes, however, she seemed to have forgotten everything she had just told me and asked for her breakfast. Funerals, cremations, etc., etc. After my grandfather's death, I repeatedly attempted to travel energetically to him. However, each time I was blocked and immediately sent back to my physical body. Nevertheless, I kept trying. I knew that although it is easy to consciously visit a loved one when you are tuned into his or her unique overall vibrational frequency, it is only when the universe allows this visit that you will be able to travel to that person successfully. After my 20th attempt, I was finally able to see my grandfather again. I felt myself flying through space with faster than light sensations over what looked like a futuristic metropolitan city. Everywhere around me I saw blue domes that looked as though they were made of glass, with a few tall and narrow buildings scattered among them. Oddly, everything was either blue or green. There were no other colours. I soon spotted my grandfather standing outside one of the blue domes on a path next to patches of vibrant green grass. He seemed to be expecting my arrival, and to my amazement I landed right in front of him as though I had been driven there by a powerful, unseen force. My grandfather looked at least 40 years younger than he did the last time I saw him, and taller. He had also jet black hair instead of the white hair of old age. In addition to these obvious physical differences, he seemed extremely alert and refreshed, and didn't have a single wrinkle on his face. I noticed he was dressed in light blue attire that reminded me of the medical scrubs worn on Earth. After spotting others around us dressed in the same clothing, I asked him out of curiosity, "Grandfather, where are you?" He replied to me in a slightly biting tone that was unlike him, "A place where dead people roam. Where else?" I desperately wanted to embrace him to tell him how much I missed him and still cried for him, but I decided to compose myself as I didn't want to make him sad. As he looked around us, he continued in a rather dispirited tone, "It is literally a place where dead people roam." I gazed curiously at his throat to check if the laceration from his tracheostomy was still there, but it was gone without a single trace. More people rushed past us in their blue uniforms as though they had to be someplace. "Well, I know that this is the place where dead people roam, Grandpa, but what is this place exactly? A hospital?" He replied briskly in the same sharp tone, "Yes, a hospital for the dead. But why are you here?" His response sounded bitter and nothing like the grandfather I knew. "Well, it seems I'm fated to live in a hospital either during my time with the dead or the living." After it became dreadfully clear to me that my grandfather had no idea where he was, I decided to stop bombarding him with questions. As I curiously studied my surroundings, I noticed a man with short blonde hair who was dressed in a noticeably lighter coloured uniform than everyone else. He began to approach us. He cheerfully addressed my grandfather by his name and turned to me and asked, "You're his granddaughter, the conscious traveller." I nodded and said, and he said with a warm smile, "Your grandfather just woke up from his long, rejuvenating and healing power sleep. We have yet to show him around. He asked to see you the moment he was brought into full consciousness." "Is that the reason why I've been unable to visit him?" I asked with curiosity. He nodded reassuringly. "We've put him entirely to rest here while we worked on healing his energetic leakage. The operation he endured during his physical life was on his throat, causing great energetic leakage. All of the damage done to the physical is shown through the energetic, and vice versa." "So this is a hospital where people who died with damage to their physical body go?" He nodded. "Before this journey, I used to think that people could simply heal themselves in the energetic world and that no professional help was necessary." He smiled at this and responded, "Well, people who generally just die aren't professionals in healing. The healing here is very different from the healing on Earth. We don't perform surgery on people at all. Unlike the physical body, as you probably already know, the energetic body is healed through the will of the mind. Therefore, our healers are actually adepts at restructuring the energetic body through the usage of the mind. Most doctors who reside on physical planet Earth, though highly educated on the understanding of the physical body, greatly lack knowledge of the two other existing bodies. If these doctors instead sought an understanding of this and integrated these discoveries with the knowledge of the physical body that they currently possess, many lives would be drastically improved." He paused and continued thoughtfully, "I think I've given you enough information that you could take back and share, as I've been instructed to do. Your grandfather needs to go for his power rest again as he is not fully well. Do you want to come with us to his room?" I nodded and we entered the door and began walking through the domed building. Inside was what appeared to be a hybrid between a hospital and a hotel, but without that negative feeling I'd grown accustomed to during my grandfather's stay at the earthly hospital. As we walked down a long hallway, I reminded my grandfather, "Grandpa, remember my 3 messages. They still pertain here. I know you belong to a much higher vibrational frequency. From the look of it, this place is just a transitional area that everyone with physical damage must go to." We soon arrived at a room with a comfortable looking queen-size bed, and the man instructed my grandfather to rest there. I proceeded to tuck him in and promised, "I'll come back again. Please remember my 3 messages, okay?" As I continued to say my goodbyes, the man suddenly turned to me and warned me that I was going to be pulled back into my physical at any moment. He bade me farewell, and seeing that my grandfather was comfortable in bed, turned to walk out of the room. I began preparing my return to the physical when a thought suddenly raced across my mind, and I called out after him, Wait, I have a question. Why does this place look so much like Earth? I thought this place is in a higher dimension than Earth." He looked almost impressed by my question. "Because everyone with damage to their physical body comes here first, despite their differing levels of vibrational frequencies. For this reason, we constructed it on the basis of familiarity." This immediately reminded me of the areas of the chakras, as though he had read my mind, and he nodded and said, "Goodbye now. I will take good care of your beloved grandfather. Do not worry." I was quickly pulled back into my physical body and woke up with a calm sense of relief from finally knowing my grandfather's whereabouts. At that moment, I decided it was best not to visit him for a period of 30 days so that he could quickly adjust to his new surroundings without being distracted. On the 30th day, I stared at the calendar for at least 15 minutes before making up my mind to travel to him that night. Everything in this universe exists in the perfect synchronicity of timing, and that night it felt undoubtedly right for me to travel to him. Before going to bed, I followed the usual protocol of matching my frequency to my grandfather's and ordered my mind to go to him. I soon found myself flying, but this time instead of landing properly, I quickly passed through a small green dome and penetrated through many rows of walls until I ended up in what appeared to be a small classroom containing a group of students. The room had 5 small, round, green tables scattered throughout, and among the many faces I found my father seated at a table to the far right. As soon as my father saw me, the teacher standing at the front of the classroom immediately directed his attention toward me. Amusingly, he reminded me of Colonel Sanders, he of Kentucky Fried Chicken fame, with his iconic white hair, beard, and mustache. "Hello there, come and join us. This is his granddaughter, and she's a conscious traveler. Please proceed to have a seat next to your grandfather." As soon as I sat down next to my grandfather, I couldn't help but ask him what this place was. He whispered over to me excitedly as the teacher continued speaking, "I, along with 9 other people, have been chosen to go to a higher place, so we are required to take these classes." I pressed him for details, and he told me that he had been learning fascinating things about the history of the universe, its structural makeup, and the different realities contained within it. Then I heard the teacher ask the students, "So, do you understand? This is indeed a very different world than the one you have previously known. Every emitted thought is sent to the dimensional barrier through time and space. This is precisely why the concept of thought is of incredible importance." My grandfather then introduced me to the man sitting next to him. His name was, it's a long one, Tanusukalwit. And I repeated the name many times to myself so I'd remember it when I returned to the physical. My new acquaintance enthusiastically expressed how excited he was to be going to a higher existence and described the classes they were required to take as out of this world. In the midst of our conversation, I suddenly heard a loud, annoyingly familiar noise and was instantly pulled back into my physical body. I later learned that the noise had come from yet another round of my boisterous neighbour's hardwood floor installations. 11 days later. That night I meditated briefly before going to sleep and communicated to my mind that I was going to travel to see my grandfather again. Within a second, I found myself detached entirely from my physical body and flying through space in the various dimensions. Instead of landing back in the transitional realm I had last been to, I found myself in a dimly lit hallway with what appeared to be a reception area at the far end. Two youthful-looking Asian women and an old man dressed in a long white Chinese robe came into my view as I walked toward the long desk in front of me. The man was skinny with a long white beard and thick white eyebrows, and I noticed that he was holding an ancient-looking wooden staff. He reminded me of the wise old men depicted in ancient Chinese scrolls. As soon as he spotted me, I saw his jaw drop and he approached me with excitement and delight. He embraced me like an old friend, and as he held both of my hands, exclaimed joyously in his thick Chinese accent, "Saho, Saho, you are here! You are back!" I was utterly confused and thought he had somehow mistaken me for a fellow named Saho, so I said to him politely, "I am not Saho, my name is Kartika." Despite my comment, he simply ignored me and continued with his enthusiasm unabated. "I miss you. I miss you. You came, finally." I repeated with some exasperation, "My name is Kartika, not Saho." I saw his eyes widen in bewilderment, and he asked hesitatingly, "Cart?" I responded hastily, "Yes, I'll spell it for you. It's Khartika. This is the lobby of this place, right? Do you think you could perhaps look me up? I'm looking for my grandpa." To my disappointment, he avoided my question and said with a smile as he patted my back, "Saho, it is good that you are back. I was so sad when they told me you had gone back to that terrible world." After listening to him repeatedly express how glad he was to see me again, I asked him with curiosity, "Do we happen to have a past life together?" He nodded enthusiastically a few times before explaining slowly and majestically, "Long, long, long time ago, when the wind was blowing hard in a mountainous region, we had a life together in a place that is now called Malaysia. Or is it called Thailand? It was a long time ago. It wasn't known as that. We were studying spiritually together. And we had another life together in a place called Potala. Saho, I was your teacher. You were a good student and have always been my favorite. You were a brave soul, Saho. You have endured much, haven't you? You went back to that awful place without telling me." I wonder where that awful place is. It must be here. Distracted by my strong desire to see my grandfather and knowing that my time there was limited, extremely, I impatiently interrupted him. "Sir, can you please tell me the story another time? I really want to find my grandfather." I realized how rude my statement must have sounded when I saw the disappointed look on his face. So I quickly added, "I'm very sorry if I sound rude. If we had a life together, I would not remember it. In fact, I do not know anything about most of my past lives. I'm actually not back for good yet. I'm still attached to my physical body, in which I'm known as Kartika. I came here to look for my grandfather." He seemed saddened by my response and asked, "You are not back for good yet? So how did you get here?" I explained to him that I did not know, and I simply wanted to find my grandfather, at which he gazed at me with concern and asked, "Who is your grandfather, Saho? Or by what name is he known as?" My grandfather actually had three names. The first was used by his grandchildren, the second was his formal name, and the third was used by his relatives. I mentioned his first name to the old man, which garnered no response, and then mentioned the second, again receiving no response. It was only after I said my grandfather's third name, the name his relatives used for him, that the old man grinned widely and exclaimed, "You're his grandfather, Saho? He is a remarkable man of high virtue. He made an impression on everyone." I was overcome with a sense of relief and asked him excitedly, "So you've met him? He's not at that hospital place anymore? He is indeed a great soul." "Yes, everyone has to pass through here before being segregated to places that match their vibrational frequency. Your grandfather made an impression on everyone. A man who came from such a small spiritual level and was placed on such a high level. It shocked and surprised everyone here, as it is an exceptional case." I was incredibly happy to hear this and asked the wise man if my grandfather was in a much higher existence. No. The old man suddenly threw his arms in the air and answered, yes, and large. Even the door to go through it is so large and wide, it's so big. So it's been a while since you left that hospital place with the domes made of glass? The old man chuckled me upon hearing me say this and exclaimed, glass? It's energized crystal, not glass. Yes, he came here and stayed longer than the others, as he was an exceptional case. Coming from low spiritual understanding and then going to such a big place. You should be happy for him. I spoke to him. He is a friendly and wise man. I smiled in agreement as he continued. Saho, I thought you were back. I was not allowed to contact you. That's why I never did. I didn't even know how you were managing in that world. How were you doing there? Feeling compelled to give him some sort of answer, I replied, I'm currently writing a book to help people realize the truth about multidimensional realities and assist them in their spiritual understanding. A book? But still, Saho, I do not know why you would go back. I only have one message for you. Your true nature is Saho. I like the name Saho better than that cart, too. It suits you better. If they allow me, I will contact you. I give you all my good wishes. As he turned away from me, I called after him. Wait, are you the gatekeeper here? Can I go to the place where my grandfather is? Can you open that door for me and allow me in? He smiled warmly and said, I just assist people to go through the correct doors to the existences that match their spiritual evolution. I send my blessings to you, Saho. Till we meet again. Goodbye. And then, as though I had just asked a question that I was not allowed to ask, I was abruptly sent back to my physical body. Interestingly, when you ask a question that you're not supposed to ask, one that exceeds the bounds of knowledge permitted to you while traveling energetically, you're either abruptly sent back to your body or receive an answer in a soft murmur accompanied by a peculiar buzzing sound. Well, you can see there is a reality that corresponds to a certain set of cultural expectations, hierarchical expectations, notions of higher and lower, and who deserves to go where, and questions that should be asked and other questions that should not be asked. And it's not all like that. If you feel deeply subconsciously due to your cultural conditioning that the afterlife realms are structured that way, then that is the area that you will guide yourself to or will be guided to, just to fulfill your comfort zone. As a religious Christian might think he's entitled to talk to a minister, but maybe not a bishop. You know, that sort of thing. It's all hierarchy. And hierarchies are based on preconceived conceptions. Although what she's saying about spiritual readiness and vibrational levels are true, but they're not hard and fast true. They're, what shall I say? Approximately true. Anyway, later on, she gets past the afterlife and into other dimensional realities altogether. One particular misty spring night, I managed to travel to a planet entirely composed of water. My perfect escape. All around me, I saw complicated mazes of thin, interconnected wooden decks scattered all over the glistening, calm aqua water. There was not a single wave in sight, and the only noise came from the light slapping sound of my feet against the damp wood. As I hopped from one deck to another, overwhelmed by extreme feelings of joy, I suddenly lost balance and nearly skidded off into the water. Struggling to find my equilibrium, I was quickly distracted by a chubby man sitting at the edge of the deck with his legs dangling in the water. He had light brown hair. He was wearing shorts and a plain t-shirt. Nothing too different from what you would find on planet Earth. Leaning back on his elbows with his eyes peacefully closed, he did not acknowledge my presence until I approached him and politely asked where I was. The name of this planet is the third planet, he asked telepathically in a peculiar accent, stretching the vowel of each word as if his life depended on it. It is here that animals and beings such as us live together in constant harmony. It is not like Earth, where you are from. Here we live as equals with the animals as they roam about. Now, I would say that people on the astral plane would say such a thing. There are many references and many accounts of living peacefully with animals that might be our enemies or predators or afraid of us here. So that in itself is not an absolute indicator of another planet. It could be another dimension, because there are many dimensions of the spirit world. More than I'd care to enumerate, that's for sure. He straightened his back and opened his eyes, staring into the clear water ahead of him. I could see the panorama of the deep blue ocean reflecting in his sparkling eyes. But before I could compliment the water's great beauty, he started to tell me a remarkable story. Long ago, during ancient times, there lived a boy in a certain region of earth. It is now known as Greece. He grew up a sad orphan, his life overwhelmed with countless misfortunes and obstacles. When he turned 8 years old, in what seemed to be yet another affliction, he slipped off the side of a cliff and plummeted into the depths of the ocean. In that moment, the boy was convinced that death was unavoidably near for him, and that, indeed, his life was over. But instead, in the midst of being half unconscious, lying on the misty ocean floor surrounded by deep-sea dwellers, he felt himself suddenly being placed on top of a large fish. Darting through the expanse of the blue ocean, the fish hurried to the surface, and soon enough the boy managed to take a breath of air. He found himself on the back of a dolphin. Since that very incident, it was as though he had been transformed into an entirely new person. He felt more positive, more alive, and happier than ever before. But perhaps more impressive of all, most impressive, he instantly began to emit a remarkably high vibrational frequency, and he could not explain why. As the man paused, he looked out at the endless expanse of blue horizon. I moved a couple of feet closer and sat on the edge, gently dipping my feet also into the warm water. I thought about the boy and the dolphin that had saved him. Having just returned from a trip to Greece, I was quickly reminded of something. Did you know that there's a very well-known image originating from ancient Crete of a boy riding a bottlenose dolphin and playing the flute? I asked him in excitement. Do you know what that image truly means? Turning toward me, a warm smile across his face, and after pausing for a short moment, he lifted his finger and placed it between his thick eyebrows. Contrary to popular belief on your Earth, the odd and unusual-looking noses of dolphins do not serve as any particular symbol. The image that you speak of depicts the real dolphins of the past on Earth. It illustrates the strong connection formed through the power of the higher energetic frequencies that exists between the boy and the dolphin. Dolphins are unique in that they are able to identify the overall vibrational frequencies and energetic essences of other beings. The boy was able to achieve a higher vibrational frequency through the presence of sound. Upon hearing his words, I immediately thought of the boy communicating with the dolphins through the flute, and I wondered if I, too, should try doing that. Interrupting my thoughts, the man explained, "It is incorrect to assume through this image that the dolphin was able to identify and connect with the boy through the sound emitted by the flute the boy is pictured playing. Dolphins are indeed attracted to particular sounds and are most certainly able to identify specific sounds of a higher nature or higher vibrational frequencies. But their ability to do so is achieved through the usage of vibrational frequencies that they themselves emit. These vibrational frequencies go hand in hand with water to achieve an energetic unity." He paused briefly to take in a deep breath of the ocean air before continuing slowly. The boy in the image. He is playing the tune of the energetic bond that exists between him and the dolphin. This energetic bond can only be heard energetically, not physically. When you travel to various high-dimensional existences, it is likely that you will form friendships with the higher beings that you meet on your adventures. You must be careful not to confuse these friendships with the superficial friendships that are common on Earth, those that are usually achieved through gossip or trivial connections. The friendships you form on your multidimensional journeys are instead achieved through similar energetic sequences. They are bonds consisting of energetic alignments that go far beyond lifetimes and dimensional realities. When such a sacred bond is formed between two beings, the conjoining of their energetic frequencies creates a vibrantly beautiful symphony that is heard only in the energetic existence. Such a bond, in human terms, causes a frequency that is especially loud when the energetic essences of each being are next to each other. The man concluded his story, bringing his hand back down behind him, and turned to me with an expectant look in his deep-set eyes, as though waiting for my input. In my mind, I was captivated by the image of the kind dolphin and the boy. The beauty of their energetic relationship engulfed my every thought, and I implored myself to remember the beautiful story. With a grin on my face, I promised him, I'm going to write this in a book, but I don't know if I'll be able to remember it all. Well, Kartika Go, the multidimensional traveler. There's certainly much more interesting stuff in this book that we'll get to next time. And until then, enjoy your own out-of-body travels, even if you can't remember them. Or, if it's a bit sort of spotty. It gets better as it goes on. A little bit of the jigsaw puzzle here, another little bit of the jigsaw puzzle there. And eventually you build up a picture. And eventually that picture becomes three-dimensional, and eventually it starts moving. Until next time, friends, so long.